Thanks so much, Bob, for that introduction. And Libby, if you're listening, I hope you're feeling a lot better today or very, very soon. It was really a pleasure working with you, developing this service. I'd like to share with you today a challenge that I had. It's really a family challenge, but it's at the intersection of family relationships and medicine, I suppose. End-of-life decisions for a patient and his or her family are hard, but sometimes the planets are in perfect alignment. If you're lucky, the diagnosis is firmly established. The patient has a clear vision for his or her end-of-life preferences based on a clear understanding of the medical information, the prognosis, and the physician was able to clearly describe how different scenarios might play out. However, very often the planets are not in alignment for any of a large variety of reasons. And when that happens, the patient and all of the close family members may face a real challenge. I'd like to describe to you a challenge my family encountered when my mother faced a very serious and potentially fatal medical complication after struggling with Alzheimer's disease for 14 years. And perhaps my describing this family challenge might help some of you deal with this type of challenge should it occur with one of your loved ones at some point in the future. My mother was named Joan Werblin Nierenberg. She was a wonderful mother, grandmother, and wife, well loved by her husband and 3 children, Wendy, the oldest, the middle son, David, and then Lori, my baby sister. But first, let me clarify some confusion about names. My mother and my wife were both named Joan Nierenberg and both attended Mount Holyoke College. Not only that, Joan's mother and mine were in the same dorm at the same college at the same time, and in roughly 1940 ran against each other in the election for dorm president. What are the chances of that? Wendy is my older sister by 2 years, and she was a great big sister. After completing college and training in musicology, she married her college boyfriend and moved to San Francisco, had 3 beautiful daughters, and over the years was able to come back and visit New York to visit our parents only occasionally, given her young children and the distance involved. Meanwhile, my baby sister, Lori, is 2 years younger than me, trained as a lawyer and works at the State Department. She probably was the closest of the 3 children to my mother, perhaps because she had a number of years alone with my mother after Wendy and I had voyaged off to college and graduate school. All 3 of us siblings had been very close, but not surprisingly had somewhat different perspectives on medicine in general. But we all remember hearing from both of our parents frequently that family is the most important thing in life. When she was about 66 years old, my mother first began to notice problems with short-term memory. She kept forgetting where she had left her purse, or where she had put the car keys, or why she went over and opened the refrigerator. We all do this occasionally, but Mom was doing it many, many times each day. She had incredibly strong social and interpersonal skills, so most people did not notice these short-term memory lapses. Long-term memory, interestingly, was bothered much less. For example, she could remember her college roommates and boyfriends by name and all of the words of her college song. Finally, I was able to get Mom to see a gerontologist that I respected at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and after a long examination, he diagnosed her with early stages of dementia, most likely of the Alzheimer's type. This news was really a shock to all of us, especially to my mother. Initially, she was willing to talk with us about her new diagnosis and to think about ways to deal with it. Support groups, putting labels on all of the cabinets in the kitchen. However, a few weeks later, at a routine visit with her primary care doctor, he told her that she did not have early dementia, but just some slight memory issues as most people get when they get older. Unfortunately, after that visit, Mom would never again entertain even the possibility of having a progressive form of dementia. And ultimately, and sadly, that made life much more difficult for her. If you can think back to 1986, when she was given her diagnosis, we were just starting to understand the importance of having every patient develop their own wishes for their advanced medical directives in case they became unable to make decisions for themselves. My mother, after much coaxing, was able to do this finally, but only to say what her wishes might be if she was, for example, in a horrible car accident and went into a deep and permanent coma. She did not wish to be kept alive by artificial means. But she really refused to entertain the possibility of what might arise in the course of progressive Alzheimer's disease. After many years of living at home with my dad, who was very supportive, with help from caregivers in later years, she finally needed full-time care and was moved to a nursing home with a special memory care unit. When she first moved in, she recognized all of us, often, but not always got our names correct. On most days, her old politeness and social grace shone through, and she would say hello as if nothing was wrong, but she really, most of the time, didn't know our names, where she was, or why she was there. For patients in nursing homes, the biggest risks are falling and infections. One day, she slipped on the floor that had just been washed, fell, and broke her hip, her femur, to be medically precise. That is a very painful injury, and if not pinned or fixed immediately, can also quickly lead to ongoing severe pain, bed sores from not being movable, pneumonia, and death. The operation to fix a broken femur is fairly straightforward orthopedically in most patients, and they return rapidly to their home, or in this case, to the nursing home. My dad was the default decision maker as their spouse. He asked all three children what we should do, and not surprisingly, all of us agreed that mom should undergo this acutely painful but very recoverable surgery. After all, there were still parts of her day that she really enjoyed. The plan worked, the surgery was successful, and mom was able to return to the nursing home rather quickly. Rehab was not really possible given her state of confusion, but she seemed to be pretty comfortable, even though now, without the rehab, her time was restricted to lying in bed or sitting for periods of time in a wheelchair. For the next few months, living in New Hampshire, I was able to visit occasionally. Lori was able to drive up from Washington, D.C. less often, and Wendy, with a large and growing family in California, least often. My dad lived very close to the nursing home and visited frequently, but his wife of many years was slowly disappearing right before him. And over the months, she no longer recognized him, and her speech was limited to just very few illogical and garbled words. A number of months after her hip surgery and after her ongoing decline, a new problem developed. The skin over the incision became red, hot, swollen, and tender, and the incision began to drain fluid. A culture of the drainage was positive, and a diagnosis of staphylococcal infection of her hip hardware with the plates and the screws was made. For this particular type of infection, there's only one way to have a shot at curing it, and that is to take the patient to a large hospital with an extensive orthopedic surgery program, do a major surgery to remove all of the infected metal hardware, treat for a long period of time with powerful intravenous antibiotics, replace the hardware with antibiotic impregnated material for many weeks, and if you were lucky enough to cure the infection, undergo a second big surgery to reinstall new metal hardware to hold the hip together. In other words, to cure this infection, my mother would need to spend many weeks in a large hospital where she didn't know anyone, undergo two major painful surgeries weeks apart, and receive prolonged courses of intravenous antibiotics, again, when she didn't know anyone, nor did they know her. And even with all of that extensive surgery and treatment, there was no guarantee that a cure would be achieved. So my family asked itself, what would my mother have wanted to do in this situation if she could speak for herself? But of course she could not. She had not been willing to admit that she has Alzheimer's disease and was not willing to spend time thinking in advance of this type of late in disease progression medical scenario. My father, who had watched his life partner gradually decline over the last 14 years, and who thought she was not really doing anything on any day that gave her knowingly joy, was willing not to treat this serious new infection, as he felt mom no longer recognized anyone, could not effectively communicate, and had no measurable quality of life worth prolonging. But my two sisters, who lived far away and hadn't seen their mother in several months, were not ready to have their mother leave them yet. They hoped that she still might recognize them at some level, and they needed time to visit with her at least once and to prepare to say their farewells. I knew my father was ready to let mom go, but when he found out that his daughters might want mom to undergo the very substantial and painful multiple hip surgeries with prolonged intravenous antibiotics, he didn't feel comfortable making that decision on his own. My father and both of my sisters turned to me and said, well, Dave, you're the one with medical training. You should figure out the right thing to do here for mom. I guess this would fit the definition of a challenge for any of us, especially when the patient is a family member unable to communicate, has an irreversible dementia following a predictable downhill course, and a new life-threatening infection requiring at least 2 courses of surgery and major antibiotics. And 2 daughters favor one approach, which will allow them time to arrange to come and visit, but involves multiple painful surgery in a strange hospital, while the husband favors no painful operative treatment at this time. And then they all 3 ask you to make the decision on their behalf, as they don't agree, and no one really knows what the patient would say for herself. I recognized at this time there was no single clear best answer, and I realized this was a really challenging family and medical situation. This was 21 years ago, and I didn't realize at that time I might be talking about it at a church service 21 years later. So what would be best for my mother? I wanted to be sure she wasn't transferred to a large impersonal hospital environment for a very painful surgery, and then another painful surgery after weeks in the hospital receiving intravenous antibiotics. I wanted to find a way to minimize any pain she might have from the infection, and certainly to avoid a major operation. I wanted to respect my father's perspective that she had suffered enough and didn't have anything pleasant in her life at that point that she was aware of. I wanted to respect my sister's wishes and give them time to visit with mom again and have a chance to say their goodbyes. And I wanted to do what was best for mom, but respect the needs and wishes of my father and sisters. And how do you combine all of that and come up with a plan? I propose that we leave mom in the nursing home where she was most comfortable, with caregivers who knew her and genuinely cared about her. Because they could not give intravenous antibiotics at the nursing home, I suggested that we begin treating her hip wound infection and hardware infection with high-dose oral antibiotics that could suppress the infection and reduce the amount of pus draining out, and with luck eliminate her fever, but it would not and could not be curative without the major surgery. This would give some amount of time, perhaps weeks, maybe even several months, for everyone to visit and prepare to say their goodbyes. And we could also add some oral pain medications if they became necessary, although just thus far, the infection didn't seem to be causing pain. The infection responded initially quite well to the oral antibiotics, and mom lived quite a few more months until they became ineffective. She did not appear to be in pain, and all of us were able to make multiple visits over those months to visit mom and say our goodbyes. Eventually, as we knew would happen, these multiple Different courses of oral antibiotics became ineffective, and in 2000, she died peacefully of the spreading infection, leading to complications of pneumonia, with a bit of sedation at the end, making sure she was not suffering a feeling of breathlessness. My main goal in sharing this story of our family's challenge is to encourage each of you to think about these difficult issues and how they might relate to members of your own family. I encourage you and your family members to record advance directives for common situations that might occur, and then to update those directives if a new life-threatening condition is diagnosed. These directives will help your family members know what a sick family member would want if he or she became unable to speak, and the discussions within the family in advance of a crisis can be very helpful to all. Lastly, I wanted to be sure to say that while none of us agreed at first on what plan to follow in this painful situation, the love that bound us together as a family was strong enough to help us figure out a solution together. I hope each of us will have that type of loving support from our families if we are ever placed in a similar situation. Good luck to each of you as you work with your loved ones to navigate the shoals that may lie ahead in our own medical voyages or in the voyages of other members of your family. If there is time, and I hope there will be, Bob Lucier and others here on the support staff will review your comments or questions left in the chat section of Zoom during the Laura Nero song that is going to follow immediately. And perhaps we can discuss one or two common themes briefly after the musical interlude. Also, I think at the end of the service, we are going to be able to arrange a chance for you to join a deepening conversation about this topic if you wish. Thank you.